Hello, fellow human. Today I would like to talk a little bit about motivation, habits, and routine. And I'm going to introduce this cool little hack that I've devised that has been really helpful for me lately, and I've been getting some good use out of. So I thought I would show you, and it might be something you would find cool too. Those of us in the less hospitable regions of the world may be kind of feeling the crunch right now as winter sets in and everything seems to screech to a halt over the holidays. And of course, forming good habits becomes the front and center concern moving towards New Year's. So if you stumbled upon this video at all, you've probably been looking into other things about motivation, presumably. And if you watched any of those multitude of stoicism type videos out there, they really overemphasize, the discipline, the grit, the try hard, sort of force yourself to do it, suck it up and do things you don't want to do. That's all well and good, but when it comes to good habit formation, that really is not the name of the game, and there's a lot of aspects of that are the really toxic and unnatural and artificial kind of lifestyle impositions. The truth of being human is that we're fundamentally lazy. That comes with all of this negative association in our hustle culture, but it's just not the way of it. When you're making decisions as a human in an environment, you're motivated by a balance of energy conservation and desire to acquire resource, be it food, water, shelter, what have you. And you have to always be balancing and doing the cost-benefit analysis. Is the risk worth the potential reward? Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And so we've really downplayed the importance of energy conservation in our current work paradigm, but it's very, very important, because if you don't have a reservoir of available energy when a lucrative opportunity does present itself, you can't take advantage of it. So what you want is a lifestyle that is more in alignment with the level of ease that our ancestors operated at. So the first perspective that I want to take a look at is that of Christopher Alexander, who I absolutely adore. He's awesome. He comes at it from a much more holistic civil engineering perspective than a specifically architectural one, but it's interesting. His insights about spatial organization and interior design are really pretty clutch. And one of the things that he emphasized that really stuck with me and has worked a lot in my own life is setting aside a particular area for a personal project. And if you have the space to do this, it's really good to do so. Not just, there's lots of information out there and videos talking about separation of tasks in different spaces, making sure you're not working in your bedroom and you're using it only for sleep, and things like that. So I'm not going to go too much on that in this video. I want to look specifically at his nook concept for having specifically a place that is separate, sometimes even in elevation, like you have to take a step up or down to get there. And you see that a lot in Japanese architecture, where there's a separate room that's kind of off or alongside a main area, but is separated in some way, either like a booth seating situation or a table tucked away. And he kind of described it as, the place that you can leave a puzzle out that you can work on a little bit and then come back to. And every time you're going through, say, the kitchen, to get to another part of the house, you glance over and, oh, there's that puzzle still. I could take a crack at that later. Or it's a visual reminder that you have this task. And that's been really effective for me, not so much for doing puzzles, although I love to do them. For painting, having a separate area to go, especially, depending on the medium. For me, doing watercolors, you have lots of drying time, lots of phases. So being able to put a layer on, walk away, let it dry, leave it out is important, because if I were to try to schedule it to, make sure it's dry enough for me to put away, so I'll have that space available as a flex space to go do other things with later, it kind of doesn't work. It's sort of, if something gets all the way put away, I find that I have a really hard time sitting back down to do it and getting it back out, because you're adding another level of resistance when you need to get something out, get all the supplies for it, be prepared for it. And I haven't really heard anyone talk about it this way, but the reason that is so unnatural for us is usually, the unit of humanity is not the individual, it's not the nuclear family, it is the community, it's the village. So within the context of a village, you already have a division of those specific task spaces, right? You have a hut for tanning, you have this area for wood chopping, or whatever the task is. You go to that space, which has been delegated for by the community, not the individual having to, fit all of that within a single domicile. And it's very easy. It's very intuitive that you go to that space to do that thing. It's also very important for, for connection, for multi-generational relation, because you have to have these open, visible, livable spaces that are active workspaces that children can come into and observe and be involved. And so typically within a household, an individual nuclear family style one, the kitchen is really the only active workplace that that you have. And usually it's located in the center of the home, so people do have to pass through it. And over time, this has kind of built up more tension, and it's kind of become more of a territorial war zone, at least in my experience growing up. Sometimes this was the case. If someone wanted to come in and be involved in the kitchen who perhaps didn't seem to possess the aptitude or what have you, they would be promptly ushered out of the space and asked not to interfere. But that's not ideal. You want to create a space that is inviting and inclusive in order to channel togetherness. And because of sort of the dual gendered nature of the activity of cooking and food preparation, it's become particularly alienating in our modern family unit, that the only active workspace that is inviting or open is only open to the daughter potentially. And that's just, it's not good. If it turns out she's not interested in those kind of things and it's kind of imposed, it can feel very much like being put on display or being put on the spot. It's performative, because it's got that open nature. There's a lot of judgment that gets levied on that whole activity, and the same scrutiny is not applied to other activities. So it's bad news bears, right? We need a much bigger variety of inclusive activities, first of all, and we need more equity when it comes to the involvement, because we hopefully we want to have a new generation of the jack of all trades, the very versatile, adaptable, curious, eager to learn all sorts of skills children. We don't want to keep hyper specializing. We'll be doomed to fail as a species if we continue to do that. So part of that is when I was growing up, the office, right, the masculine space was very off limits when Daddy was working. That was no, you don't interfere, distract under pain of death, right, basically. And there would be specific times of day after the workday was over that the invitation was open and inclusive, and there was never anything like that for me as far as these are girl things, these are boy things. It wasn't so much that, it was just the seclusion aspect. So I was invited in to learn all sorts of computer skills at a very young age, for which I'm very grateful, and ended up being pretty useful. But that's not the case, I think, and especially going forward with more of these remote working situations and more working from home, more people are going to be struggling with that balance between privacy, productive work, and including the children and helping them to be able to observe. Like there's a lot that can be learned just from being present, just from watching, and it is possible for the child to do that without being wild and rambunctious, and that behavior needs to be cultivated. So that was a bit of a tangent just on the child rearing aspect, but the learning of any skill, it's going to be the same mechanic at any age. So in the adult household, when there are no parents present to be watching and learning from, and you're trying to pick and choose and cultivate specific skills, it can be really challenging without, the leadership or the presence of a mentor to get yourself to go through the motions, set up that kind of space. Those are all challenges that can be really daunting in the beginning of starting anything new. What does a workshop even look like? What kind of tools do I need to have? And as you're trying to accumulate those things and get it better set up for yourself, every obstacle, everything that you don't have that you need for this particular process, feels like a big setback. Sometimes financially it's a very real big setback and a delay. And, there's lots of great information out there on any given subject. Here's things I wish I knew before I started such and such. So in a lot of ways, it's the best possible time to be a well-rounded person as far as the open and free and available education aspect is concerned. But in a lot of ways, it's the worst as far as the actual human contact and involvement and the ability to observe someone in that state and emulate, because the monkey see, monkey do is very real. We learn by imitation and repetition. So how do you do that in a vacuum? How do you do that in a separate house? Especially when you have a lot of limitations on space. I don't have all the answers for you, obviously, but I do have this nifty thing that I have come up with lately as I've been studying and internalizing more about, the elements and their applications. A personal one came up, and I've been testing it out, and I think it's pretty cool. So it revolves around these lovely little plastic pieces. You don't have to use this type. I just find that the acrylic is nice and colorful and lightweight and cheap. It could be marbles, it could be natural stones, or whatever you have around. But this has to do with integrating the visual connection to, feelings of accomplishment and workspace. This is particularly important when you're doing anything digitally as your form of productivity or your output, right? Because even if you finish something like a digital painting, you have a deliverable. But that doesn't always feel very crunchy, right? That doesn't always feel very tactile. It's kind of easy once you've done it to forget about it unless you're kind of engaging in unhealthy habits like, watching on your social media account how many likes it's getting and all of those things. So if you're trying to break down that habit in particular, this is really helpful for creating more real and immediate gratification for having accomplished something, and it abstracts it enough that the performance of the individual thing is not where the sense of accomplishment is derived from. It's just the feeling of progress, right? That's what we're trying to create as humans. We have this kind of insatiable need for a sense of progress or accumulation or moving forward. That all feels very good to us. We like we're trying to create a state of abundance for ourselves. And a lot of what holds us back in life are fear-based, feelings and scarcity mentality and feeling like things are not available to us, that we don't have enough. So in order to mitigate that, we can very visually indicate for ourselves the opposite. And it's weird, and it seems a little silly. And I at first was like, well, I know what's done and what's not. I have checklists. I have, my drive and my to-do list and all these things well organized and color-coded, and, that's all seemingly crunchy, but it's still digital. It's not physical. And that has, I think, some psychological limitations, and, especially when you're self-employed and there's no other, outside indicator of your progress, and you're not getting feedback from a manager or something like that, you have no idea where you're at or what day it is or what's happening sometimes. So this was cool. I'm going to put a demonstration video of the crunch factor for you. But the general gist is that this is an elementally based system, but please keep in mind that could just as easily be color-coded. You can code it to any activity that you like or any category. It's just the general idea of having different categories to try to keep track of which might be advancing faster than others, for instance. You could get lots of benefit just from the cookie jar technique, type of approach of, using the marbles or keeping track of, any positive activity. But I think the separation of different categories of whatever type you choose is really helpful, I think, for finding balance. That's been my finding so far. So, as an elemental system, of course, we have the red for fire, yellow or orange for air, green for earth, and blue for water. Water typically rules over the emotional space or the relational space, the sense of connection to other beings, of empathy and compassion. So activities that might encompass that are anything to do with emotional regulation, anything that helps you to feel yourself, in your energy, in your flow. So introspection, self-care, meditation, taking salt baths, things like that kind of all fall into that category. For you, even though it could also be earthy, spending time in nature might fall into this category. And back to Christopher Alexander, he talks specifically about access to water as being a fundamental human need and right, and how community spaces should always feature something like a pond or a fountain, and these tend to be the places that people congregate around. And we know this intuitively. I'm not telling you anything new. The watering hole is a very deep archetype. The central fountain or the duck pond tend to be the places that we're drawn to. And incidentally, there are a lot of social activities that go on there. So maybe for you, as it has been for me, even going to a bar ends up being in this category because for me, I kind of needed that extra oomph, that extra motivation, or what have you, after being secluded for so long, to try to go back out, socialize more, meet new people. We have a lot of negative associations with places like bars. It's like, oh, this horrible low vibe, situation. But that's not the case. That's a little self-righteous, I think. This, for time immemorial, pubs and taverns have been places where people congregate to make connections and to celebrate and all of these things. And I think that can be deeply positive, obviously, if you're developing some sort of, alcoholic addiction, or actually having a problem, or finding negative patterns of behavior that you want to break down from being in those kind of environments. If it makes it more difficult for you to be your best self, don't. Maybe that's the opposite. Maybe that's something you want to be disabling rather than enabling. But if you're focusing on the aspects of it that are things that you want to improve, by all means. Other watery activities maybe that are, depending on your situation, more difficult might be something like calling a relative or calling a friend. If you find those kind of interactions to be difficult or taxing, or they're bringing up some hang-ups for you, maybe actually writing that out on a to-do list such as this, and having there be a reward in this way would be helpful, for remembering to call your mom or something. Keeping in mind, that water is about relating. It's about being in touch. So other things that might fall under that could be music appreciation, which helps with both personal emotional regulation and also relating to other people. So, maybe taking time, perhaps with a friend, to listen and share songs. That could be an activity that falls here. We used to do that as a community activity, or super serious song sharing evening. It was always good. It was always amazing. Or you're sharing movies, sharing memories, going through photographs. Those could all be things that fall under watery energy. maybe art falls here for you, maybe something that puts you into a flow state. We talked about in the modes of happiness video, the flow state being associated with water. So it could be something like a craft activity, or it could be maintenance, because maintenance can also fall under water. Things like cleaning might fall here for you. You might have more of a watery association rather than the kill it with fire, burn it away kind of cleaning mentality I often have. Maybe in a more maintaining mode, it's cleansing, it's purifying. So I think any of those activities, if you're making this association and conducting them with mindfulness, you can get a lot of benefit from feeling accomplished and having them done, and not just, resenting them as an obligation. I think it's especially dangerous with maintenance type activities to feel begrudging or like they're a waste of time or a burden, or oh God, why do I have to do this? It can become a point of resentment if there's partnership or multiple people involved, or household, and you feel like somebody isn't contributing as much of that. So, building these lists and then comparing them together can be enlightening. It can be really healthy, I think, to have conversations when you are collaborating, like who's doing what, and how do you feel about that? What is your association? What does this mean to you? Because I think always becoming curious about it and having, meaningful, maybe not always positive, but focusing on, I want to understand, I want to come into better connection and really know why you do this, not just from the point of being able to criticize it or anything like that, but like, why is this happening this way? And I think the more credence you give that, the more deeply that you seek to understand that, the better it's going to be if that's a connection that you are hoping to maintain with that person. So moving on, we'll do Earth next. Earth activities tend to be associated with the more crystallizing or fixating or solidifying aspects of life. Things that are slower, more conventional, maybe say more practical, more down to earth. So those activities can be things like acquiring food, for instance, like going to the grocery store. That might be something that falls either under water in the sense of like replenishing. Replenishing things around the house could also fall under earth or water for you, like refilling the soap, making a point to check the levels of things. It's not something that falls onto most to-do lists or onto the radar, but you can prevent a lot of stress if you're doing a good job of keeping track. And there's more subscription services and things like that than ever to help make it easy to reorder things. I'm particularly bad about toner and things. Envelopes, the worst. But really getting a handle on that has been surprisingly helping. It's not the kind of thing we acknowledge a lot either. It's like improvements that we've made. It's important to spend those moments of self-gratitude of like, I'm really glad I've gotten better about this. I'm really glad I don't have to deal with that anymore. At least that's not, the way it used to be. When I'd have orders I had to ship out and I'd have to like go to the dollar store and pick up more stupid envelopes and have a separate tray. It was awful. And I don't have to do that anymore. I have gotten better about that. So, even if it's dumb, even if it's a small thing, give yourself credit, because it's very important for that sense of accomplishment and progress to have gratitude, acknowledge. So replenishing. That could also be for you depending on how you feel elementally. That could be a very earthy thing. That could be very dense, stodgy energy of like restocking the shelves. Other things to do with food or, meal planning could definitely fall into this if you're the kind of person like me that struggles with remember to eat, or, you're trying to eat healthier or have a better balanced diet in general. Planning meals can be really helpful. And there's lots of great information for that and great subscriptions and things. And in that same vein, things like supplements, other things surrounding food could fall under the earth category for you. Other maintenance. such as vehicle maintenance. Again, could be water, but that might be a grindy practical earth thing, getting regular oil changes, doing things to do with the seasons, things to do with acclimatizing. Maybe that you need to put all the things away for the winter, you need to do your fall cleanup, things like that. Raking leaves, I counted that as an earthy activity. Things to do with maintenance of houseplants or yard or garden. It can also, for you, be spending time in nature, going for hikes. Could be certain types of physical activity. You might, depending on your physical goals, have separated things like cardio activity from weight training activity. So you might want to find a balance in those two things in your system. Earth for you could also represent any number of money-related, financial activities, such as budgeting, going over your subscriptions that you have, looking at expenses, sort of clipping coupons or like exploring deals, or maybe just shopping in general counts as earth for you. It could include setting new financial goals or taking a look at what you're saving up for. And maybe you're the kind of person who's in the habit of not paying really close attention to those things, and you have a goal of being more mindful about it. There's lots of great apps and things like that now to help with that, and it's nothing to be ashamed about if it's not your forte, if it causes a lot of stress, if it's something that you're anxious about. The first thing to do is just take that one step. Just take a look at it. Like I said before, for a lot of these things, you're going to pick a very small unit of whatever the minimum is for you to get you to do it. Even if it's just like opening, you make a point of opening your account up and taking a look at it once a week. That's already a step in the right direction, and that improvement can lead to other improvements, right? Incremental changes over time. We're not looking to overhaul anything or do anything crazy. We're looking at the habits that you already have and making edits, trying to make the things that you want to do less of more difficult or less desirable, or whatever you can do to decrease the likelihood that you're going to overdo it on those, and then increasing the likelihood that you will engage in the positive activities and the things that you feel will help you closer to accomplishing your goals. I think that covers it for Earth. Is there anything else? Crafting and those type of things might fall under this too. Like I said, I had sculpting here, so if you have other hobbies might fall under Earth for you, such as jewelry making or weaving, things that are really tactile, very physical, physical labor, carpentry, things like that might fall under this for you, depending on what type of hobby you have. So moving on to air. Air tends to be associated with the mental realm, with thought and speaking and, music, philosophy, things like that. It could also be visual art. So any activities that have to do with reading more, that's a goal that I currently have. I used to be pretty prolific, and there are times in our lives that we go through a lull and it slows down a little. Not having access to a good library right now has kind of been a damper on my usual book count. So, if you're noticing something slipping or a change in your circumstance that does make habits that you used to be really good at harder, be patient with yourself and be gentle and just take some time to get it back to the level that you want it to be at. So I've waited, my normal amount is huge, but I've ratcheted it way back just to get myself to do it. And, sometimes these things change over the course of our life and our circumstance. So reading, for you, maybe is just 5 minutes. Maybe it's just like doing it before bed. Maybe you're focused more on the regularity of it than completion of books, and that's totally okay. Maybe it's studying a language. Maybe you're doing something like the Duolingo thing and you're just doing a little bit a day. Maybe you're taking some time with a friend or a pen pal and, just practicing conversing, once a week or whatever it is. Those are all perfectly good units. Maybe it's writing, maybe it's journaling. For me right now, it's creative writing, but for you, it could be anything. It could be blogging. It could be writing letters directly to people. That can be a good thing to do if you're feeling out of touch, if you're feeling, lonely, just taking letters that you could just do in an email and choosing to actually write them out physically can be really therapeutic. It can feel more impactful. Practicing anything to do with communication, calligraphy. Yeah. You want to come up? Come on. Come. You say hi? This is Potato. He's a good boy. Yeah. You say hi? Thank you. Thank you for making an appearance. So air can also be things involved with music. I had my vocal practice there underwater because for me it's more maintenance, but maybe actually practicing or songwriting or jamming, playing in a band, that might fall under air for you. It depends on your sentiment about it and what you are hoping to achieve. If you're actually, producing, if it's something that you're just doing for yourself, maybe you have a different association with it. But I think most music can pretty squarely fall under air. Studying, continued studies, can be really difficult to get motivated for and attack as an adult. Without the guidance of coursework, sometimes it can be difficult to focus. So, maybe under air you have something like a Udemy course or something online, one of those other course subscription services, or, maybe that would be where you put more formal continuing education if you're looking to pursue an additional degree or certification. Everybody's going to be in a different place with this potentially, but I think the most important thing is that everybody has something here because, there's so many people that don't pick up another book after high school, and, we do so much of our reading digitally now. Everything is on the phone, everything is articles, everything is very fragmented. To really sit down and read an entire book is sometimes a pretty big goal. So just, if it's something you want to do, break it down into manageable pieces and just get started and just do a little bit at a time. As in general, for forming good habits, I think it's good to put some type of air activity, reading's great, in place of phone time, especially before bed if you're looking to achieve greater quality of sleep. Sleep itself might be something that you have under your air activities because it's so important for mental health and for acuity, let's say. So, getting a good night's sleep might be something that you need to motivate yourself for and have on this list. And it's totally okay to do that. It's a good goal to have. So because air rules communication, art might be here for you. I have it in different places, but visual communication might fall under art. If you do things like collages, that might feel like a more airy activity to you, making associations and comparisons. Maybe you do poetry, you do recitations, things like that might fall under air for you. If you're a video content creator, maybe doing videos, maybe doing voiceovers, or journalism, things like that might fall under air for you. So fire for me was pretty difficult to balance because I wouldn't say I have a negative association with it. You do, throughout all of these, want to be careful about activities that you're kind of setting aside as things you really don't want to do or particularly negative. We don't really want to be labeling anything as such. We're wanting to value it as such. If it's something that you have trouble with, or you're having trouble starting in particular or getting yourself to do, it's okay to give it a higher value. And it's much better to do that than to form a negative association in your mind, because that's going to build up more resistance. And especially if you're having any negative self-talk as you're trying to engage in those activities, if you sit down to do it and you're like, oh, this is going to suck, or like, I really don't want to do this right now, or I'd rather be doing anything else. Sit with that, take note of those feelings, be brutally honest about the fact that you're really not enjoying that. It could be good to take some time to really think about, what is it about this that is so unappealing to me? What's going on? If it's something that I need to do, is there something that I can do about it to make it more appealing? Maybe it's the space you're working in. Maybe it's, how long it's taking you. Maybe it's the anxiety of having to do it alone, or the chore that makes it. Just look really carefully at what it is that makes it so appealing and try to remove some of those obstacles for yourself if you can. Or, if it straight up is just one of those things that, it could be cleaning toilets, it could be something that, just nobody wants to do, just value it appropriately. Just give yourself an adequate reward if you do it and it was something that you had to suck up and get done. So for some people, exercise is going to fall under the fiery category. Fire in the weekly schedule that I have is the day that I have set aside. If there's anything I really don't want to be doing, or administrative things tend to fall either on a Monday or Thursday. If there's anything that could be procrastinated, I sit down and I think, okay, is there anything that I've been putting off that I really don't want to do, or this, I've got a deadline coming up, I've got to apply for this thing, I've got to send this form, I've got to pay these taxes, whatever that kind of thing might be. I usually try on Thursdays, at least once a week, to at least look at what those things might be, or be aware of what's coming up so nothing is blindsiding me. But I also make a point of knocking out at least one of those things that I kind of don't want to do on Thursday. And then it's just well, this is the day that we do this. My partner and I both have the same day, so we both do something that we don't want to, and then we're on even footing, and it's well, that's out of the way. We both feel good. It gets it out of the way of things that we would want to do. And it feels good to do that. So maybe you have associations like that for fire of, the things that you don't necessarily look forward to or want to do. So for me, I have 16 total activities. Just it ended up shaking out that way. But whatever, from your total number are, you probably want to, for each category, if you do have a negative association with it, try to balance out within that category some things that are positive and some that are negative until you're achieving a better balance of those feelings within each category, right? Or trying to erode some of the resentment with those activities. And that will happen naturally. That will 100% take place just over the course of, if it's something that you have intentionally been avoiding and you put in the effort to doing it more regularly, you will get better at it. It will become easier. You will find adaptations to make it less of a chore. Maybe you will find people to do it with, so that will make it more enjoyable. It's going to happen naturally. You don't necessarily need to grit it out or toughen up. Maybe you will have to at first be receptive and willing to do something you would not otherwise want to do. And things are going to be that way in the beginning. It should not necessarily be that for the long haul, in that sort of, Joe Rogan, eat the steak, do the workout, sweat it out kind of way. I don't think that mentality is particularly helpful, as we talked about before, because it doesn't come naturally. It's not how we would do it as a collective. So another way that you might look at it, depending on how you feel about socialization, if that's more of a watery thing or a fiery thing, you might put more of those kind of social engagements here, like doing crafting things together, right? Forging is a very fiery thing to do. Synthesizing, connecting, melding could be a good way to think of the fire element here. So for me, when it's something like a collaborative project, that could fall either here, because I associate fire more with that sparky creativity, or water. Those, depending on how you feel about temperature, because typically fire is associated with heat and water is associated with cold, both being in that sort of fluid state though. as I said before, the forging, the foam sits here for me, depending on what your hobby is. You might have something that goes here. Maybe cooking is more like this for you, or more grilling, or like smoking, or, competing. Maybe if you have an activity that has different modes, you want to split it up. And so you have the practice activity, maybe for you feels more earthy or watery, but then the competition feels more fire or air. So you could split up an activity in multiple modes of that activity if you're trying to find balance between how much you are building at that thing, practicing at that thing, cultivating that thing, and then applying that thing, showing that thing, expressing that thing, or competing with that thing. So that might be a helpful way to think of it for you. So at the end of all of this, right, what is this for? What's the point? Why are we accumulating? I haven't actually filled any of these yet, so I don't completely know, if I'm honest with you. But the premise, the concept, is to fill these jars and take a look at which ones are filling first, just to kind of note and be aware of, like, okay, well, I'm doing way more of these activities. I should be mindful of that, figure out what's, first of all, take like a positive look at it, be like, oh, well, something about this was more appealing, something about this was easier, or I did a better job of facilitating these activities, or like, I really applied myself. First, give the positive, and then try to apply the learning from what might have been going right about that element to other areas they feel might be weaker or need some more energy given to them. So, take the learning. If it was multiple people contributing, have a meeting about it, talk about what went right, or like what felt good, and you could then do some sort of journaling about that and keep track. If having a written record of it is helpful for you, sometimes it is for me, sometimes it's not, but I'm sure with time we'll find what works. But filling one of these jars should feel very crunchy. Being able to dump them all back out into the crystal pool and start again. My concept has it that each one has a different type of reward, or, things might count as rewards, things that you don't want to deny yourself necessarily, but you're trying to delay the frequency of, or, minimize in your life, but not say no to, or like make yourself have to work for it. And of course, the classic parenting adage is that, you're not supposed to use food rewards for your children, whatever. I don't know. I think it would be perfectly fine, as has been evidenced by the way that they motivate us through my 90s childhood. If you wanted to get the kids to do something, the reward would be a pizza party. That's just how it seems to work. So, for me, that's something that the frequency should be low on, but it should not be prohibited, because, of course, we tend to become rebellious and become resentful whenever something is outright prohibited. And I don't think it's necessary. I don't think that is really a good thing, to just outright say, like, I'm just not going to eat sugar anymore. It's a very hard line. It's like very easy to break too, it's very abrupt. Cold turkey doesn't work for everybody. So maybe more what you want to do is decrease the frequency, or add limits, or create an obstacle. So having to fill a jar might be an obstacle, and of course the size and the amount you will have to personalize for your needs. But we've kind of gone through and looked at what we want the reward to be for each of these things. Maybe it's a purchase, maybe it's a trip, maybe it's eating out, or whatever the thing might be. It should be something tangible, physical, digital stuff. Maybe you could, maybe a new game or something like that would be good. But I think, keeping it crunchy and making it be a very real physical association that you're making of, like, yes, doing this thing, I get abundance. The emphasis always should be on progress, abundance, feeling of plenty, things that really biologically tap into that need that we have for feelings of freedom, feelings of variety. Variety is very important. Feelings of choice, feeling of agency. Anything that contributes to any of those areas of life would be a really appropriate reward in any of these categories. Or, you know, for you, maybe you don't need the reward to be separate for each element, or you don't need to designate what each one is going to be. So maybe it's just the next in line gets to be that thing, and you keep track of, you know, a big goal like that. Or maybe it's better to not plan ahead for what the reward is. Maybe the reward itself is just whenever it gets completed, it's whatever whim comes to mind or whatever is most pressing and desirable at the time. So maybe it's more a reward of spontaneity, or it's some kind of granting of permission to whatever the present carrot might be. So I talked a little bit in the elemental ritual video about this weekly rhythm, and that was kind of more from the community perspective. So from the individual perspective, we also have a weekly rhythm that starts with water on Monday, water and shadow, and then Tuesday is earth, Wednesday is air, Thursday is fire, and then Friday is, you know, rainbow. It's a free day. And that's been really helpful. We've had specific blocks of time that are collaborative work time, alone work time. And, you know, planning meetings specifically on Monday, we call it the temperature check, just to touch base and see what the goals are for the week. Try to be really specific and communicate, I want to accomplish this, or this is time sensitive, here are the things that have to happen. And then, you know, keep that to a minimum where possible. You know, you want to keep most things in the realm of, oh, I could do this. So those discussions also, you know, are very exploratory of like, you know, this could be accomplished this way. Is there a way we could group these things more efficiently, or get more things out of this one trip, or whatever the case may be. So I think it's helpful to have at least one day a week, if you're living with multiple people, to really set aside some time, have a planned meeting, make sure it's a time that works for everybody and doesn't build up any kind of resentment for being distracted from something else, you know. But make sure you're taking the time in to communicate, to go through, and make sure nothing is getting neglected, because you know, having a deadline fall through or something like that causes a lot of tension, and when you're cohabiting, tension's bad. So I think that gets to the gist of the way that I've been using it. But to explore some other coding options, you could also, if you are in the midst of study or in school, instead of going with the elemental route per se, you could just assign per subject. So, you know, maybe one is math, one is science, one is whatever. And just having the 4 different colors could help you maybe keep track of study sessions, or, you know, maybe it is assigned classwork, and you can get a view at a glance of which ones are being best tended to and maybe which need more intentional support. This could also be really great to implement for your kids. The ones I used for on the wall are glass. I would have loved to do, you know, plastic out of concern for fragility, but they're lightweight. They hold up pretty well. They came with the hooks. I'll link down below the ones that I used if you're interested, but it can be anything. It can be plastic, it can be jars on a shelf, it can be on the counter, or anything like that. But for an application with kids, you know, that could be used as a visual guide instead of a weekly chore list or checkbox situation. I found just writing it, especially as a kid, is not really the most helpful reminder. So having the brightness of the color and the immediate visual cue is really helpful. And it feels crunchy. The sound is really good between the glass and the acrylic. You could probably be even better. You could probably max that out even more. But I find that deeply satisfying. There's something very gamified and crunchy about it. So I hope that was helpful. I think I summarized pretty well the current use. If you get any use out of this and want to comment, I would love to hear if you have modifications or personalizations that you make, or different suggestions you might have. I think this is worthy of further investigation and exploration of possibilities. So, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great holiday.